r/AskReddit. Psychiatrists of Reddit. What was the most obvious attempt to fake insanity you've seen? Psychologist. Not psychiatrist. But I used to work at the VA as a trauma psychologist. My job had nothing to do with whether people got service connected. That was an entirely different process. That said, a small minority of people thought if they could trick me into doxing them with PTSD, they would be rolling in dough. They would not have been. The most blatant version of this was someone who had clearly found the DSM criteria online and tried to parrot it back to me without knowing at all what the symptoms meant. At one point this person told me they have hypervigilance. When I asked them to give me an example, they looked like a deer in the headlights. I want to stress how small a minority of people this was. Most people I worked with, 1, really did have PTSD, 2, were extremely distressed by it and had it affecting their lives immensely, and 3, wouldn't actually file for service connection because they didn't think they deserved it. I think veterans get a lot of flack for filing spurious claims for service connection. But on my side it was a very small minority who were trying to pull one over on people. Most of these men and women just wanted to feel better. That said, a small minority of people thought if they could trick me into doxing them with PTSD, they would be rolling in dough. As someone with PTSD, I can assure everyone reading this that I have made exactly $0 and possibly many thousand negative dollars from my diagnosis. WTF. It has to do with a misunderstanding about how service connection works for veterans, as well as PTSD often being considered an acceptable mental health diagnosis by some military folks because it's a sign that you've gone through some shit, whereas depression or anxiety etc. could be perceived as weakness. A resident's face fell quite dramatically when I informed them the attention in ADHD doesn't mean you like attention. As someone with AD, always fun when people think that. I was diagnosed with AD in 1993 or so, and I have never heard this. I need to get out more. You are probably just not paying attention. Dude, he has AD. He obviously isn't getting enough attention from people to focus. That's why he's not paying attention. Not a psychiatrist, but a secretary for a PICE ward at a VA hospital as a college student, who was also trained to be part of the takedown team, i.e., when a patient gets unruly and non-compliant, we are sent in to safely get them restrained. One day I came into work expecting it to be a normal day. I immediately hear the code over the comm system for the takedown team to come to room 3. Room 3 is the intake room and where all new patients are seen. We arrive in the room to assess the situation, and there are fesses spread on the walls and a man rubbing it all over his chest, completely naked. We managed to get him restrained without too much hassle, and we are all covered in fesses at this point due to him fighting us at first. We get done and him restrained, and the doctor on the team asks him, "Why did you feel the need to rub fesses all over?" His response, "I'm homeless. The US gov't won't take care of me, and I want food and a place to stay. The shelters are full, and I knew that I could get at least 72 hours of warmth and food by acting crazy." We gave the man a full 2-week treatment stay instead, and had the VA and AV come in to get him housing. Literally one of the best patients I've dealt with while working there from that point forward, even helping to calm other vets down on the floor before we had to do a takedown. It's absolutely atrocious that these veterans feel the only way they can get the help they need is to do something this extreme. Last I heard the guy was doing much better. Dav helped him get a job doing cleanup at construction sites and an apartment of his own. Edit. Forgot to add. The doctor could tell this man wasn't likely to be insane. All of his answers to questions and tests came back normal. That's when he went to rubbing fesses all over because he knew without something extreme we'd have to release him. I'm glad he didn't just immediately start with the fesses. My last date said the same thing. did a psych placement as a student, and was in a discharge meeting with this homeless guy. He was brought into the hospital because police had been called as he was threatening to jump off a bridge. He claimed depression and suicidal thoughts, which it was found out not to be. So he said he was hearing voices, which was also not true. Dude was just desperate to have shelter and food. Sad case. How do you prove that someone doesn't have depression, suicidal thoughts, or is hearing voices? You can't. People just confess they were lying. Happens very often. Same way people often confess that they might hurt themselves if released. If they genuinely wanted to die, it would be trivially easy to lie about it and then off themselves after they got out. But most of the time they confess that that's what they'll do, and so stay on the ward. Can confirm it's crazy easy. It's why I've always thought the what would you do if you were trapped in a psych ward questions on Reddit are funny. After your 72 hours are up, they're trying like hell to get you out of there. During my time there, most of the time with my doctor was spent discussing how to get me out of there. Have you called your family and told them you're here yet? Do you have a place to stay when you get out? Will you need a ride, or should we call you a cab? They're desperate to get people in and out of there. There's not enough rooms and not enough staff. If you tell them you no longer feel like you're a threat to yourself, they'll probably believe you. I was the only person on the ward who wanted to go home. Everyone else wanted to stay, and the doctors were trying to get them out. I've been inpatient probably 6 or 7 times, and there have definitely been a few times when I wanted to go home and they wouldn't let me because they thought I'd be a danger to myself. I think most of the time that's true, but not always. Feeling trapped in a psych ward is hell. Read The Psychopath Test by John Ronson. It mentions a real example of someone like One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. They pretend to be a psychopath to get an easy ride. But that's the method a psychopath. If you're into podcasts, he did an episode of The Psychopath Test for This American Life. Had a mother come in and insist that her child had Silver Russell syndrome. You can go read on it. It's not that easy to fake, as it's a bunch of metabolic conditions mixed with congenital abnormalities. The kid was small, but not that small, around 6th percentile. He didn't weigh much, 5th percentile. All of this, with a right arm length 2 centimeters more than the left side, were borderline criteria for Silver Russell. Did genetic testing, which came back negative, but 30% of cases are negative. So the deciding factor was one of the soft criteria of hypoglycemia. Once she heard about this, she printed out 30 to 40 articles on the disease. She came back with the kid in a coma. But when the kid was in the hospital, he was never hypoglycemic. He went home and came back in a coma a few weeks later. Again, as soon as he was eating normally at the hospital, he was never hypoglycemic. She starved her child into comas repeatedly for the diagnosis of Silver Russell. She was also a bargain. People who live off welfare and make a game out of it. By the way, she was in a wheelchair when at the hospital. Once I had enough of her bullshit and walked into the room after only knocking once. She was walking around normally and jumped into the wheelchair as soon as she saw me. I believe it was for money, since in Canada/Quebec, you get money when your child has a genetic disability. If it was legal, I would have slapped some sense into that bitch. WTF starving her child to multiple comas just for some benefits. Starving her child is the benefit of the benefit. I had a lady who loved detention. She thought she was crazy and had dissociative identity disorder. Think the movie Split. Actually, now that I think about it, I saw her around the time that movie came out. She claimed to have many different personalities. One of them where she regresses into a 10-year-old boy named Billy. Anyways, this lady started screaming, tantruming, throwing herself on the floor. Nurses were trying to control her without giving too much attention. and feeding into it. She then saw the medical student and the patient told him, "Tell Dr. Macaroni and Sneeze that Billy is out now." She said this incredibly clear and concise, not in a whining 10-year-old tone she was switching in and out of. I was very confused by her comment until I read your username. Psych nurse. Back in the 90s, multiple personality disorder was all the rage, and not true. I would regularly treat people, some of whom claimed 100 plus personalities. Lol. Yes, it was trendy in the 90s. If you were convincing enough, you could find your way onto an all expense paid vacay to be on Springer or Sally Jess or Maury or any of the other dozen trashy daytime talk shows from that time. Oprah even had a man on her show claiming he had it. Sorry for tangent, but has anyone else heard someone say my mother/my friend was diagnosed as clinically insane? I used to hear it all the time in high school. It was trendy. I remember talking to a guy in my year about how I thought I might have bipolar, and he was like, "Don't joke about that stuff. I'm literally clinically insane. Sometimes I go stand in the square in the middle of the city and just scream at the sky." Apostrophe. When I was in high school, 90s, there was an urban legend that if you had tried LSD more than X times, I think it was 5, then you met the definition of clinically insane. How do these things even get started? The one time I heard this, it was also during the 90s, but it was from a DARE officer, as is the case with about 80% of what they taught. This was false. Oh, yeah. I was super invested in my DARE classes and didn't even question when they said you could get chemically addicted to weed on the first try. I was dead set against any chemical stronger than caffeine for a long time. Now, I'm a stoner. They basically led everyone in school in the 80s or 90s to do more drugs. Once people figured out weed was just kinda boring and not at all harmful, they would diversify. Thankfully I don't have an addiction-prone personality. The nightmare when you actually have problems and people just think you are lying. Or when people doesn't take your problems seriously. The feeling of powerlessness is undescribable. Took me 3 tries before someone figured out my back, neck and hand pain was scoliosis. Literally the first 2 doctors just needed to give me an x-ray. Patient who yelled, "I'm having a seizure," while shaking all limbs uncontrollably because we were pretty sure malingering guy didn't meet criteria for admission. Still makes me chuckle. Lol. This reminds me of a client that would fake them often. If she didn't like what you were saying or what was going on, she would slowly lower herself to the floor saying, "Thanks a lot. I'm gonna have a seizure now." Followed by her fake seizing while complaining until she got too tired. "I'm dead. Thanks a lot. I'm gonna die now." Slowly lowers self onto floor while complaining about death. Not a psychiatrist but genuinely insane when unmedicated. I think where people go wrong faking madness is how big they go with it. I have bipolar, and during mania I come across basically the same as always. Bit more energy, much more interest in sex, drugs, being awake. I think the government have my flat bugged and someone invisible keeps breathing into my ear, but other than that we good, let's do shots. Backquote, insanity rarely looks like it does in movies. Sex, drugs and being awake. Because rock and roll is dead. I've got a laundry list of issues, and for the longest time I refused to go get tested for fear of being committed, but more so because I was worried the psychiatrist was going to think I was faking, and for some reason, that scared me the most. There aren't nearly enough beds in psych wards. Unless you are an immediate danger to yourself or others, you're going to get sent home even if you want in. And committing someone against their will is extremely difficult. Usually requires a judge to sign off on it. If you feel like you need to talk to a professional, talk to a professional. Even if you are faking it, which I very much doubt, they may be able to help you figure out why you feel like you need to fake it. Psychosomatic illnesses are definitely a real thing and often misunderstood. If you have a symptom that doesn't seem to fit a diagnosis, it's rarely because it's fake. It's usually just caused by something else. Nausea that feels like a stomach flu may actually be caused by anxiety, and the anxiety may be caused by stress related to trauma. So it may feel like to yourself that you're faking illnesses because your symptoms don't make sense, when in reality, you just need someone to help you work through something at the root of it. You've reached the end. You're a star. Destroy the subscribe button for more like that.